Louie Sees the Light is a really brilliant episode of Taxi. Really thoroughly enjoyed this. This is the 16th episode of the first season. It is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And this one starts off with Louie being really angry and aggressive and basically just being himself. And then he's almost doubled over in pain. And he agrees to go to the hospital, and we're we're at the hospital. And it kind of went from funny to being a little bit slow to being even funnier. Latka is offered a box of chocolates. Well, he's offered a chocolate. And he takes the box and he eats them and he eats them and he continues to eat them. And it lasted, well, initially it got to about 10-15 seconds and I thought, all right, this is getting a little bit ridiculous. Let's wrap this joke up. But then the longer it went on, I actually found it funny again. And Latka ate chocolates very quickly for 41 seconds. I did go back and time it. And honestly, it was so effective. It did feel a little bit slow, and then it just picked back up again, and I rather enjoyed those 41 seconds. And I enjoyed the rest of the episode. When Louie is alone with Alex, he tells Alex that actually he's quite scared. I really like seeing this vulnerability with Louie, because obviously with Louie, mostly he is aggressive and confrontational and not very pleasant, but every now and then we see a little bit of his more vulnerable side or his softer side, and he ends up praying, and just the way Alex kind of looks up at the sky, at where God is, and it just amused me so much, the response to that. And Louie makes a promise that if God gets him through this procedure, then he will become a better version of himself. He will be the best version of Louie that he can possibly be. And then we cut to the garage, and Louie enters, and he's back from the hospital, and it seems like he's a changed man. He's being very, very kind to everybody, very understanding, but not everybody is convinced. And Bobby decides to test Louie by telling him that he had an accident in the taxi. And Louie is really feeling this physically. He is physically wanting to respond with aggression, but he doesn't. And he tells him it's not his fault. Bobby reassures him that actually it was my fault. Basically saying, you're allowed to be angry at me. This was my fault. Obviously, there wasn't actually an accident. Bobby is making this up. And it goes from bad to worse with the story. And Louie doesn't respond. And I rather like that. And then Bobby decides to confess that actually he was just testing him. And Louie didn't like the sound of that. And I absolutely loved how this played out, because Louie, with a wide range of facial expressions, begins to move round the taxi closer and closer to Bobby. And the next thing we know, Bobby is being hoisted up into the air. And Louie is just going off on this rant about how he's going to make sure Bobby always gets the worst, messiest, smelliest cab, and he's going to make everything a nightmare for him. And he's going to make him the second most miserable cab driver. And we get a couple of seconds, not too long, but a couple of seconds of wondering, well, who's going to be the first most miserable cab driver? And Louie declares that the number one most miserable cab driver will be the person who either lets Bobby down from the hoist or feeds him. Which I thought was very, very effective. And then we cut to Louie and Alex alone, and Louie has realised, well, he broke his pact. And I like that. I like the fact that he acknowledged that actually he didn't keep up his end of the deal. He wasn't a changed person. And I would say he should give himself credit for trying, because he really did try. But Alex talks with him, and Alex kind of explains that actually maybe he did keep his end of the deal, because Louie said he would be the best version of himself. And maybe that is the best version of himself. On the one hand, that seems like a slap in the face, telling Louie that that's the best you're ever going to be. But Alex helped to reassure him that actually maybe that is the best version of himself. And if God, to quote Alex, if God made you the way you are, he must have had a reason. Which I quite like. That's not to say that if somebody does a bad thing, they can say, oh well, God made me this way. But it was a talk that Louie needed to hear. And I thought it was very well written and very well delivered, and I rather enjoyed it. It's a fantastic episode. Very, very funny. Personal highlights would have to be Latka eating the chocolates for 41 seconds, which, when it started, I wasn't expecting to enjoy that, but for just the more it went on, the funnier it became. And Louie's face when he heard Bobby had tricked him, and then ultimately Louie hoisting Bobby up and his giant rant in response to that. And then Alex's talk with Louie at the end. So a lot of really strong moments, really thoroughly enjoyable episode. Very, very funny. Louie sees the light. Might be one of my favourite episodes of Taxi so far, I think. Maybe. It's a close call, there are a couple, but actually really thoroughly enjoying this season, and Louie sees the light is a really brilliant episode of Taxi.